Hey everybody, and welcome to another Dorico video. My name is David Larsen, and we're going to be looking at how to make templates today. Templates are something that people ask me about all the time. They say, how can I make a template to make everything faster and easier? And typically my answer is just open up a document you love, hit File, Save As, and then just delete everything and start over. But Dorico has actually made it pretty easy to create a template and specifically to preserve things like fonts, chord symbol styles, and other engraving options, which in Finale was almost impossible to save in any kind of template format. So in this case, it actually works pretty darn well to create your own template so that every time you start a document, you're at least in the ballpark of what you're looking for. This summer, I'm putting together a whole bunch of music that I'm publishing, and so I'm trying to get a very uniform look to all the music so everything that's coming out of my computer looks really, really great. And so that's part of the reason why I'm starting to experiment more with the templates, and I wanted to share some of these great things with you. So here we go with templates in Dorico Pro 6. Okay, so if we take a look at our start screen, you can see that, look at this. Under the Jazz template, I've already created a template. And what does this mean? Well, this means that I can put in a new project title like Template Rock, and then I can put in myself as the composer, as well as I can put in my time signature and my key signature. Now you'll see up here under the page size and things, these were predefined under the layout of my document. And because this is a document that I created and made a template, we don't have quite as many options as we do when we're creating a template from one of Dorico's. However, do note that these can all be changed once we create the document. So if I hit the create button, you'll see that it will line it up, and wow, there we go. We have the start of a document entitled Template Rock, and you can see it has my font set in there. And so if I go ahead and zoom in a bit here, I can also come down here and you can see some of my custom chord symbols. And so you can see I've gone ahead and I've customized the fonts, I've customized the chord symbols, I've customized all of these different things as well as bracketing and other elements so that the score looks just the way I want. So let's open up a different document and let's see how I created this template so that you can start creating your own templates that'll hopefully speed up your workflow here in Dorico. Okay. So here I have an arrangement I did of Walking in Memphis, and this is where I created my template. I went through and I found all the looks I really liked, and I got everything looking the way I wanted, and this is kind of where I started. Now, when you're going to make a template, there's a few things that we need to think about. The first of which is we need to think about our engraving options, because the engraving options are the first thing that we'll always want to carry over when we're doing templates in Dorico. The engraving options cover things like chord symbols and other elements that are throughout the entire document, and these are things that I typically like to see in kind of every part of my document. So to me, the biggest and fussiest part of this is actually doing the chord symbols. Much of the rest of the engraving options in Dorico are things that I'm pretty much okay with and the way they are in the default, but chord symbols I really like to customize. And so when I went in here, this is the thing that I went through first. And if you haven't watched my other videos on chord symbols, I recommend that you go back and look at how I made some changes and edits to make it so that this part of my document looks exactly the way I'm looking for. So once I've done all the edits to the engrave option, the first thing I need to do is I need to go down here and I need to hit Save as Default. What this is going to do is it's going to save the engraving options that I used in this document as my default so that anytime I load a new document from a template, it will bring in these settings for me, even if I use one of the predefined templates that Dorico provides. Now you can see here, you can remove the save defaults, or you can reset to your save defaults, and you can even reset it back to the factory settings. So if you make a bunch of changes and you think to yourself, oh, I don't like any of those things, you can go ahead and remove those things or reset yourself back to the factory, which is pretty handy. And a lot of times too, when I'm doing experimenting, if I open up a new document and think to myself, man, this doesn't look quite right, then I can always hit reset to save defaults to at least get me back to my baseline. The second thing that you'll want to take a look at when you're building your template is you're going to want to get your layouts correct. So when you go under the layout options, you're going to be met with a whole bunch of different things like rasteral size, vertical spacing between objects in your score, and other elements like that. The things that I'm most interested in when I'm doing the layout options are vertical spacing, the rasteral size and margins under the page setup, as well as the note spacing. These are the three things that, again, I think that I really want to carry forward to just about every single document. The other stuff I change a little bit once in a while, but these are the ones that I do almost every single time. So again, if you haven't watched my page layout video, I recommend you check it out, but I'll give you a quick highlight of some of the ones here. Under the vertical spacing, there's a couple of them that are really important. The first one is staff to staff. And in the staff to staff setting, that's the distance between staves in a score. So like the flute 1 and the flute 2 part, that's their spacing. Now in a single part, say in just the alto sax part, the distance between line 1 and line 2 is this inner system gap. Now in my score, I have this a lot bigger than I have in my parts, because on the score, I want to push things apart a little bit for white space reasons, but that is what that setting is. The rest of these are not things that I come up terribly often. I've never changed the staff to braced staff setting or anything like that, but do note you may want to experiment with those. The next thing I like to point out is things like the vertical justification. And this is how much the page needs to be full before Dorico pushes everything to the top and the bottom. And you can see I have these set to basically 100 because oftentimes I want to control the spacing completely, and I don't want Dorico to push them apart for me at all. Now, under the page setup, this is where I would define my size. Now, I'm in the United States, so I use letter size paper for everything. So that's a pretty much a given, and I don't like landscape scores, so there you go. Now, the rasteral size here, this one is very important. Basically, this controls the size of just about everything in your document. And so here is where I set per the template I'm looking for. Now you can see in this score, I only have a few instruments, so the rasteral size is going to be a little bit bigger than if I was working in, say, a big band score. I also like to set my page margins, and I find actually that I set my page margins relatively small, in fact, because I think Dorico always puts a little bit of padding around everything, so it's kind of nice to use up as much of that white space as you possibly can. And then I have my music frame. Now this is how much padding there is at the top and the bottom of the blue box that represents the musical frame, aka where the actual music is printed. Now again, if you watch my page layout videos, you'll see some more detailed information on this, but these are the three things that I change the most, and I really like to make sure that they are perfect, because my theory in Dorico is I want everything to be taken care of through the automatic settings so that I have to do almost nothing manual. Now, a highly underestimated option in Dorico is the note spacing, because there's a really cool feature here, which in Finale was very hard to do, but in Dorico they make it so straightforward, which is you have your default spacing for quarter notes, which is basically how far apart the big notes are, aka the beats. So how much room do you need between beat 1 and beat 2, etc. And then you have this minimum space for short notes, which is amazing. And the reason I say this is a lot of times in other programs, when you made the beat spacing bigger, it would kind of crush your short notes. But in this case, what I can do is I can actually bring the beat spacing down, but increase the short note spacing, which means that I can make the distance between two half notes smaller. But then when I have a bunch of 16th notes, they'll spread out much more visually appealing. And so these are things that I really like to set, and I will come in and I'll fiddle with this quite a bit to make sure my page looks just perfect. Now, the next thing I like to look at down here is I like to check my make space for lyrics. That's a pretty important one. And I also like this only justify final system and flow if it's more than 75%. What this means is that if I only have a couple of bars left at the very end, that line will actually be short. It'll only be part of the page, which I actually think looks nice. But if it's pretty darn full, then go ahead and stretch it out like all the other ones. So that's what that setting does. Okay. Now, there are a couple of other bonus ones here you might need depending on the kind of score you're working with, which is here in Dorico 6, you have your system attached items, which this allows you to choose what staves display your time signature, your system text, your tempos, and things. Now, in this score, it's pretty simple, so I'm not using anything custom, but in a minute here, when we look at a large ensemble score, that's where some of these settings come in handy. There's also options for casting off, so if I was making a template for, say, a lead sheet, I might go ahead and have a fixed number of bars per system, which is a really handy thing to have predefined. I can also, if I was doing something like a songbook where I wanted every single page to look identical, you could also have this fixed number of systems per frame, meaning I always want to see 10 lines on every single page, which can help you make your music look really, really uniform, which again, for publishing is sometimes a really great and handy feature, even though it might use up a little more white space. Okay, from here, I pretty much don't change any of the other defaults when I'm creating a template, because these ones are all things that I may or may not change per the kind of document I'm working on, so I don't worry as much about those. Now, from here, this is where I want to make the visual look of my score very distinct. So I want to change the font sets that I'm using, and I want to change the sizes and whether they're bold or things like that. So that's where we're going to start getting into the fonts. Now, the first thing that you're going to want to do is choose a music font. And the music font is the one that is the notes and rests and the clefs and all of those things. Now in Dorico, if we go under Library, you can go to the Music Fonts, the very top tab, and this will give you a quick list of all of the music fonts that are installed on your computer. And you can see in this document, I'm using Golden Age. Now, this is a great feature. It works really well. And you can see down here, it has this update text fonts when changing music fonts. So if a font library has a text font and all these other things, Dorico can go ahead and change all of them at once, which can be really handy if you have more like a template font where it has everything, like Petaluma, for example. You can also check this box here to use fonts recommended engraving options, which changes some of the other things to make your music look the way that the font thinks it should. Now, typically when I do this, I actually uncheck these options because I'm not generally looking to change everything about my document. Now, when you're first setting up your template, this is the dialog I use to set the music font. But after I've picked one that I think I like, then I'm going to change it in another location as I'm fine-tuning things. But this is where I first start to get the broad strokes. So the second place I'm going to go is under the library, and I'm going to go to Font Style. Now, the Font Styles menu is where almost everything about the text in our document is changed. So this is going to give us access to all sorts of different things about how we're going to display different things in our document. Say things like the figured bass, the rehearsal markers, the time signature, the tempo markings, all of these things. And the most important one are these 5 that are all right together, which is your chord symbol font, your chord symbol music text font, your default music font, your default music text font, and your default text font. Now, that's a whole big long list, and it seems really daunting, but these ones affect so much about your document that if you change these ones only, then you're going to get as close as you're going to get to your template with as little work as possible. So the first one you're going to want to change is actually the default text font. This affects so much about your document because so much about your document pulls in this default text font. So the first thing you want to do is choose your font. Now I'm using this Skia font, which I think really looks kind of fun, and I like my music to have a lot of character. But if you click here, you can choose from the many different fonts you might have installed on your computer. And if you know you have one like, say, Petaluma, you can also search for it and choose it here. Now in this case, Petaluma Script is the one for font. So if I go ahead and I do that and I hit OK, you can see that it changes much about my document because those elements were drawing from that default text font. So if I go back to my library here, and I can go ahead and change this back to my other font and hit OK, and you can see it converts them back again. Now, once you have picked the one you're looking for and you think, yes, this is the font I like, you can go ahead and hit this star down here and you can see it is going to save it as the default, which is going to allow us to pull it into our template. And again, if we use one of the default templates in Dorico, it will pull that in as our default, which is, again, a really handy feature. So the next one you're going to want to change is your default music font. This is all the note heads, the clefs, all of the things like that. You can see right now I have it set to Golden Age, so maybe I want to change this to Finale Ash. And then if I hit OK, you can see it converts my whole document over to this new handwritten font. Now, I think this font is a little bulbous and I don't really love the clefs, and that's why I didn't really choose this font. And so I'm going to go ahead and undo that and put it back to where I had it before. Now, the third one you're going to set is your default music text font. Now, the difference between your music font and your music text font is the music text font is what's going to be like the flat that's next to B flat trumpet. And it's the sharps and the flats and chord symbols and other things like that. And so when you set that, again, just like the music font, you can choose the one you're looking for, setting sizes and other things like that. Now, the final 2 really important ones are going to be your chord symbol font and your chord symbol music text font. The chord symbol font is going to be the one that represents your actual text in your chord symbol. So that's going to be the root of the chord, the F, the MA, all the things like that. And the chord symbol music text font is the flats and the sharps. It's also like the line in a altered chord where you have an altered bass note and things like that. And so you'll want to experiment with which one you think looks the best. You will notice that when you click here, you can see that the font of my chord symbol text font is actually drawing from my default text font, which is why we needed to change it first, but I'm altering the size because I want them to be bigger. And the same is true down here. My music text font is set at the Golden Age because that's drawn from my music text font down here in that other previous menu. And again, once I get this looking perfect, I'm going to go ahead and hit the star to make it my default. Okay, there's one last place we really need to look before we ever want to make a template, and that is we're going to go under Library and we're going to go under Paragraph Styles. Now, believe it or not, much of your document actually pulls from the paragraph styles when you're doing certain things, like, say, the composer of your document. That pulls from the paragraph styles, which you can see it pulls from default text and then it applies certain other style elements. Now you can see that I have my default text actually set to the Skia condensed, because when I'm doing things like a text block in the music, I want it to be a little bit smaller and I don't want it to take up so much white space. But for things like the composer, I actually want that to be the regular because I want it to be a little bit bigger. Now, if I wanted to change it to, say, an italicized version or something like that, I could go ahead and I could choose one of these other versions, and I could get some different varieties there. But like I said, I like that regular size, and so I'm going to go ahead and use that. There's also features down here for things like stretch. So if you want to make your font spread out a little bit more, you can go ahead and check those options. There's also the letter spacing, aka the kerning. And see, I can push apart the text a little bit, or I can pull it together to mimic the look of the condensed font. But you can see on the Skia, because it has a lot of white built into it, I might choose to go ahead and pull this in just a little bit because I might think that it makes my composer look a little bit nicer, which actually I think that looks pretty nice. So these are some of the customizations you can make as you're creating your template. Now you can see there's a whole bunch of really important ones like title and lyrics. And so you're going to want to slowly go through this and change each one of these things as you go, because all of these are going to add up to a really important look for your document. And so don't be afraid to get in there and really mess with stuff and see what you can make work for you, because you'll be amazed at how much better your document looks if you go through and you just alter these things ever so slightly. Now, unfortunately, this is a pretty big list, but the nice thing is most of the predefined settings in Dorico work pretty well, so you really don't actually have to change much other than your default font. And then I find things like my title block, I'd really like it to be something a little bit different, and so I have to change a couple of them, but not all of them. Now, if you really want to customize the last little bit here, you may want to go under character styles. Now, the character styles are very, very finite. They don't get used very often, but they give us a couple of great looking things, which is you can see under the metronome mark music text. This is the quarter note, the eighth note that's followed by the number. And you can see I actually am using the finale engraver for that one here because I thought that that quarter note just looked a whole lot more bold. And then I have the relative size set so that it doesn't look too overly large. The other one here I have is this music text. And what this is this is again the flat and the sharp in like the B flat trumpet. And these are things that I added in there because I wanted a really, really specific thing that I could pull from. These are pretty uncommon and you may not need to change these, but it's something to take a look at if you feel like it doesn't look quite right. Okay, now from here we have two options when it comes to making the template. One, we could just save the document and call it a day, but two, we may want to go in and change a few of the things under our templates for our page templates, meaning what kinds of things are displayed in our title blocks. So remember, for both the parts and the score, you have the first page template, and then you have your default template. The first page is exactly what it says, the first page, and the default is every subsequent page. Now, you can see here, by default, Dorico lists a lyricist over here. And I learned a new trick recently, which is a great one. If you come over here and you right-click, you can actually choose from all the different types of tokens so that you can actually pull in some of this information about your document without having to remember what all of the abbreviations for your tokens are. So this is pretty amazing, frankly speaking. But you can see I changed mine to being the arranger instead of being the project lyricist because I don't write a lot of vocal music. And then once you've set that, remember you always want to copy whatever you do to the left over to the right, because you may choose to bring your text blocks up a little bit so that you have more white space on the page, and you might choose to alter the size of your music frame. Now, under the subsequent pages, this is the same thing. You just want to make sure everything looks the way you want it. And then you'll probably also want to go to one of your parts and go ahead and change these templates as well. You can see I pushed the arranger and the composer up, and I brought the project title up so that I didn't have all that white space. By default, the layout name pushes the title block down, which I don't think looks very good. So I actually choose to go ahead and have the project title kind of interfering a little bit with that layout name, because I find, typically speaking, the instrument and the title never bump into each other. So it's okay to have them like that. One of the things I really like to add is the layout name, aka the instrument, next to the project title. So that way, if page 2 gets separated from page 1, I know which part it is, which I find to be really great. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go under File, and I'm going to save as a project template. And then here you have the categories. Now the categories are in your quick start menu when you first load Dorico. Now you can create your own category if you want, like say I want to have David's Templates. And then you can go down and you can give this template a name. So what I want to call this is baritone sax pop solo. And so now, anytime I want to make a new document that has approximately this kind of instrumentation, I can go ahead and go to my template section and choose it. Now you can see down here, there's this preserve existing flows, which means if I had a 4-movement work, I could preserve, say, an orchestra with 4 movements. And then you can also preserve the project info, aka if I always wanted it to bring up a certain title and a certain composer and a certain lyricist, I could go ahead and leave that there as well. And that actually might be good, because if you're thinking, well, I always wanted to say arranged by David and I always wanted to say composed by, this is a way of preserving that information. So from here, I go ahead and I hit save, and now I have a template. So let's go ahead and see what this template looks like. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to close this document, and then under my templates block, if I go under my create new, you will see there's a whole new category called David's Templates, and look at there. There is the template we just created. So again, we can change the title, the composer, and I can change the key signature. I can set all of these different elements. And when I hit create project, I now have a new project with all the fonts, chord symbols, spacings, and I'm ready to go. Now let's say you go through all this work, you create your document, and you create a template, but you really realize you just don't like it. You're just not happy with it. You'll notice that on all of the custom templates, there's these 3 little bars here. And you see on the Dorico ones, they're not there. And what this allows us to do is it allows us to click, and you can see we can remove the project template. And what this allows us to do is basically clear out things that we're no longer interested in having. So let's say I make a template and I use it for a while and I think, I'm just done. I'm going to go ahead and just hit remove project template. And you can see it'll ask if you proceed, this will be permanently deleted. And I say, okay. And you can see because I deleted every single template in that folder I had made, it also got rid of that extra folder for me, which is really nice because I'd hate to think it left behind a bunch of empty folders. So if you delete a template and you think to yourself, man, I really wish I hadn't done that, so long as you saved the original document you used to make your template, you can always resave that document as a template. So I've opened up this big band chart entitled Studio Time, and let's say I want to make a template out of it. I can go save as a project template, and then I can go ahead and create a new folder called Big Band Templates, and I can call this Studio Time. And then let's say I want to preserve my project info, and I hit OK. And then now, if I close this document, you'll see that under my templates, there's my Big Band template, and there's my studio time template. And so as I click on it, you can see that I can set my composer, I can set my title, but if I hit create project, you'll see that the copyright information and the arranger stayed put. So it's just a quick time saver. And again, remember, you can always delete a template, change some of these settings in Dorico, resave your template, and so you can keep updating the templates as your documents improve and you want to redo it. Now remember, if you want to do this by hand, you can always open a document, just hit the Command A and select everything, and then hit the delete key, and basically you're back to a template again. So thanks so much for watching this video on Dorico Templates. If you're enjoying all these Dorico videos, please like and subscribe the channel. It really helps me out. I've really been enjoying growing this, and I've really enjoyed adding new content. I'm going to be coming out with a lot of great music this summer, so watch out for my music videos where I'm going to be performing. I have some albums out, and I'm going to be doing a lot more work on composition and getting a lot more of my compositions out there for not only purchase, but also to help you if you're looking for some advice on how to write music, how to notate. And again, if you visit my website, larsenjazz.com, there's a link right there if you want to set up a Zoom lesson to help you improve your Dorico skills. So again, like, subscribe, watch. Thank you so much, and I'll see you next time.